And now everyone is not even shaking hands. They're sometimes doing like an elbow bump, like that kind of thing, which is a new type of normalization like that. I'm looking to see what kinds of normalizations will be set up, but I'm fingers crossed that this is that we like, since the billionaires have made verified more than $238 billion extra to the holdings of major billionaires now over the last month. That's one verification. I would suspect that the actual winnings for the ruling class, those who hold the most wealth on the planet, would far exceed $1 trillion. That's how much money has been made. How much more money do they want to make? How much more control do they want to grab and take? I don't know. I mean, whatever it is, I try to roll with it. I figured I'm going to roll with it with this perspective behind me.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to pay attention. I think those are important things to look at.
I'm moving house today. It's been 2 years, 8 months and 28 days. And I've got to say that as I step off the bus for what could be the last time spent as sitting in your boss, supermarket queues, etc. And I have to say though, it's only today that I'm glad to be leaving. I really will miss the when Santa.
Listening to truthconduit.com with Chris McMillan.
Everybody, my name's Chris McMillan, and this is another episode of truthconduit.com, and I'm with Darrell Becker. Darrell is, okay, you got a lot of titles. You're like this generalist across the board. Your main thing is you're an acupuncture, yeah? And
I'm a licensed acupuncturist.
Yep.
One.
Cryptocurrency investor, Trivium academic, and an entrepreneur. What else?
I mean, I think that's plenty. I like to say that I've been a student and teacher of mental and emotional balancing techniques, skill sets to really balance the mind and thinking and balance the emotional terrain. And I get paid for that too.
I was talking about you in the town hall meeting before, and I wanted to point out, I really liked how you said, in the worst of the situation, one of the silver linings is we've got to keep ourselves in check intellectually, emotionally, and tactically. I couldn't agree more. And I brought that up in the town hall meeting earlier. I thought that was well said. Yeah, definitely good advice for everyone. So.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure everything out just as much as everyone else is.
Yeah.
And I think what I thought was important to add to the discussion today were questions that are not being asked enough, in my opinion. And an attitude to go along with the questions, which is an attitude of putting light on the subject and not heat. I was just in Discord today watching folks that I respect talk with each other, and I was dismayed because one person was asking very bluntly, about like when it was referring to a percentage of people dying in New York City. And it was asking, is there any data on comorbidity with this data? And instead of responding responsively, like what would be necessary in a court of law, for example, the person deflected with saying, I don't think that the person's family really cares about that now that they're dead way before their time. Basically, instead of like dismissing the issue of comorbidity, which is heat instead of light. So I wanted to say, I have a series of questions that I like to ask. I would wish for more people to ask and actually put their researching skills and time into finding the answers for that. And that's part of what I'm bringing to the table today.
It's definitely a skill that I'm conscious of trying to improve myself. Because I tend to react emotionally a lot less than before, thanks to autonomy and getting involved with this group. But it's definitely, by talking about it, like you I like that, bringing light on it instead of heat. So the question that I have for you is, it seems to be coming up a lot. I only heard of this recently. My wife was telling me about it a few weeks ago. I thought this interesting, but I'm going to ask you and let you go with it. What is germ theory, and why is it suddenly coming up more under the circumstances? What's going on?
far as I know, germ theory is the theory that microorganisms have been verified, or like are a major cause of disease function, of disease, like basically the pathology. Symptoms happen due to microorganism infection, and that's the quick version of what germ theory is. And you can juxtapose this to terrain theory, like the terrain that we're both standing on, this Earth. Terrain theory in this case is referring to the terrain of the organism is very much more important than the microorganisms that might be coming in from the outside or already existing on the inside. The terrain being the acid-alkaline basis, what's going on in the body. Places need to be more acid, some places need to be more alkaline. And that's a problem for metabolism. Metabolism is another function of the terrain. Like sometimes, like me, I'm skinny, so my metabolism moves faster. That's the way I work. Other people, slower, much better in a famine or pandemic, meaning that you can store things on your body the way I cannot. That's very, very useful in some cases, also a liability in some cases too, as you see with fat people. So that's an example that the terrain is taking into account everything, and not just simple things like, for example, antibodies are a tiny portion of the immune system, very, very tiny. A vast portion of the immune system would be the function of the acid-alkaline basis that just keeps things going, the other components of health. When there are toxins in the body that can impede the actual immune function. In fact, there are actually toxic drugs out there that are immune suppressants that people take for organ transplants, for example. But there are known other toxins, things that you would inhale that are completely odorless from, I would say, indoor carpeting, from inside of a new car. There's all kinds of other toxins in this world, and they would systems of the body. So the terrain is dealing with all of the variables of health, simplified into two components: what is toxic and what is needed as far as nutrient level. So nutrient level could be deficient. That's a component to address. What is toxic needs to be removed, or if it's being produced inside the body, also that part being resolved so that they're not making their own toxins, or new toxins coming in, such as fabric softener, for example, which most people don't understand is extremely toxic. There's so many toxic things, it's just ridiculous. Impact is specific to each individual, and the terrain theory is certainly something that would, proponents of terrain theory in their medical practice, like myself, are aware of that. So I don't make a general assumption that you have symptom A called this syndrome, called this disease, therefore this equals this drug. Linear.
Yeah.
That's extremely simplistic thinking. Like my oil filter for my Honda is going to fit into your car, Chris? No way. Unlikely, unless you have a 2001 Honda CR-V.
No. Got a Nissan.
And you don't. So it doesn't. And that's how medicine works in reality, as far as I can tell, having only practiced it for 22 years, so I'm a beginner.
And it parallels public schooling, doesn't it? The whole one size fits all just doesn't work. So
it does fit that. So, there's the first step that you could have all the listeners can start to actually research terrain theory. Who invented it? What did Pasteur say about terrain theory right before his death, which is also in contention? Pasteur was the one who helped to promote germ theory, which, by the way, is an extremely profitable model. I don't think it's a coincidence that they happen to back the very profitable model of germ theory and not, the considerably more nuanced yet far more utility-wise, useful terrain theory. So that's a very important thing. Pasteur versus Béchamp. Antoine Béchamp was the person that Pasteur allegedly plagiarized a bunch of his work from. Antoine Béchamp was a considerably more rigorous scientist. Pasteur basically I would have to say he really came up with a compelling argument based on really flimsy science. And this was before ever viruses were ever known, because of course they didn't have scopes that could go down to that level yet at that point. That's in the 1800s. So, in a nutshell, I'm inviting the people who are watching and listening, just to stop with this certainty thing. That's the one thing that I was seeing when I was seeing this little I didn't even get to the point where it was getting heated, but I mean, there was a very honest appraisal to say, well, were there any comorbidities in this death that you're claiming for over there in New York? And it's like, well, I don't care because she died unnecessarily too soon. And it's like, how do you know? I'm not looking at the chart. I'm not looking at the medical chart. And the people involved in that conversation, I'm not sure that they've really spent time looking at medical charts. I've looked at medical charts, and it's not that hard. You don't have to make the claim, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a virologist, I'm not an epidemiologist. Stop with this appeal to authority nonsense. Anyone can learn enough to figure out how to research what is germ theory and who invented it, and what is terrain theory and who's using it. And those are the important questions that I'd have as far as our part one.
This is so interesting. What books or sources could you recommend for anyone wanting to dive deeper into this?
Pasteur versus Béchamp would be one. And I think a very cursory look on a good search engine that's not Google will give you a very basic understanding of these terms. I don't think you really have to go outside of search engine, that you need to have an in-print book for anything I'm discussing today. Not a single thing, but I'll try to books too.
If terrain theory gains momentum and actually is adopted, how would that change the face of medicine? How would that change things?
Well, then I would say medical providers would be focused on a lot more variables. And I think medical providers would understand that all of medicine is anecdotal and clinical. And that the studies, although they're interesting, are of minimal significance, comparatively speaking, to what is done in clinic and what is seen anecdotally in clinic. Because I think that every medical provider that I work with that's effective, they all know this by practice. They had to learn this by practice. We were indoctrinated in medical schools. I went to medical college, of course, to get my medical degree. It's not too dissimilar to what a doctor has to go through. I have to say that the indoctrination is heavy in the direction of germ theory. What would happen if I would say that massive numbers of providers switched to terrain theory is they would have to open up the variables that are important. They would have to actually do a lot more types of biocompatibility testing on every single medicine and any procedure that they deliver to their client for diagnostic or treatment. They would need to say that the studies are interesting, but you know what we need to do? We need in-clinic biocompatibility testing to see if this medicine or this treatment or this diagnostic is damaging to the extent where it's too expensive. Like the cost-benefit analysis says, don't do this.
Yeah.
And that's what would be starting to happen. People would be suddenly realizing, wow, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium levels are kind of relevant to this specific condition in a way that I never considered before. And that's because each individual is very unique. I think it would start to break down the theories of grouping people together. I'm sure you know of G. Edward Griffin, who has spent many decades harping on about the problems of collectivism. Well, collectivism has certainly infected science and medicine. And part of that is to think of the single problem, single solution angle, similar to the schooling thing you mentioned, Chris. But the other part is just to think of simple variables. We've tested for the pathogen, and we're going to get to testing in a moment. And now we know that the way to get rid of the symptoms is to kill the pathogen. And we also have these tests, these double-blind placebo studies, allegedly, that are done to show all these people who took the medicines in and survived the medicines, and then how many of them got better. Well, generally speaking, most people aren't looking at those tests, but those tests are they're too randomly irrelevant to the specifics of the individual. The terrain of the individual is the king, as I was shown when I was beginning my training. It's the ultimate, basically. The terrain is incredibly important. And to have the hubris to think that you know all of the terrain based on as many tests as you can possibly get your hands on is erroneous. You don't. You're missing data. You don't have a Star Trek scanner that goes down to the molecule. You don't have that. And until you can scan a person down to the molecule or whatever, you don't know. You're guessing. So what you would want, what terrain theory proponents would generally be doing is they're looking for a wider spectrum of variables. How much adrenal fatigue is this person dealing with right now? How many other important components? What's the acid-alkaline basis, as I've mentioned? What is going on for the person structurally, biochemically, and the third component, often neglected, bioenergetically, because the human body has a bioenergetic field measured by DC millivolt meters. And all three of those are the routes in towards repair or damage, depending on how you use them. So, so you understand, like the body has structure. That's obvious. Bones and muscles need to be in the right place. If they're in the wrong place, health is out of balance. It has chemistry. If it's lacking in nutrients, then there's things that are going wrong with that too, in certain things. If they're toxic things that can't be assimilated, such as mercury and lead, that's going to be a problem. That's going to cause problems, and it'll show specific types of symptoms among demographics. Yeah. Again, there's no generality, though. It's going to be unique to the person as well. And then finally, there are electromagnetic effects too. And the electromagnetic field of the human is healthy in certain ways, and then there's ways that would add to that, and there's ways to take away from that. So my profession of acupuncture specializes in that one component. They named my profession after one tool. Chris, that would be similar if they named a contractor carpenter after a circular saw. Yeah, that's literally what it is. We have all these many tools as an Oriental medical provider. You know, that's like literally all these many tools. They named it after one of the tools that's well known because it's, you know, one of the most profoundly iconic ones, that of an acupuncture needle. And that's metal, and the body is non-metal. Metal absorbs and tries to direct energy. Non-metal absorbs energy. So like it's like an antenna kind of thing. I consider it a subtle energy by and large, and a subtle part of my practice in general compared to the adjusting the chemistry with medicines. That's a much more impactful thing. Though there are other ways. We'll talk about that offline at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Darrell, what are the Koch postulates and how do they tie into what's going on? There are 4, right?
Yeah. There are 4 Koch postulates, and I'll sum them up in a brutally simplistic way. A microorganism, to be demonstrated that it is the cause of symptoms for an organism, needs to be found in the organism. It needs to be like microscopically detected and found. That's the step 1. They have to find it in the tissues or somewhere in the body of the host organism. This microorganism needs to be cultured. Means that like now you're growing more of this. So it's not just those ones, but now you're growing new ones. That's step 2. Postulate 3. That would be now you need to put these newly grown organisms that were cultured, whether on tissue or some type of medium, into a healthy organism. And the same symptoms need to be shown to develop. That's the very important part. We need to show the exact same types of symptoms happening.
Yeah. And
then step 4, just to show that, well, I guess it works that way. So now they're going to take a culture of, you know, basically microscopically isolate and find some of these pathogens in this new infected host, and they need to culture that and compare that to the original culture. That's the 4th part of the postulate. And interestingly, here's an interesting one, Chris. I used to think that viruses passed this test, obviously, or someone would talk, right? I held this position until this very month of April, 2020. I realized that I think I'm wrong because I haven't found a paper to demonstrate Koch's postulate as having been proven for any viral infection. And I'm going to take it a step further. I'm finding it a little challenging to find it pass actually for bacterial infections as well. That doesn't mean it's not there. And there's a lot of tricky language, and there's a lot of ways that people will say, see, we found it, it passed. And then when you read the paper, you find out that they were talking about specific RNA material, not about cultured viruses, ever, because viruses are well known to not be cultured.
I mean, is this intentionally a trick?
I'm pretty sure that it has been for a long time. I mean, originally they actually when the germ theory came out, they began to try to blame scurvy on a virus first. Well, it became too obvious that it wasn't, that it was a vitamin C deficiency. And same thing with beriberi and pellagra and a whole series of other illnesses that were, in some cases, nutritional deficiencies. In the case of polio, toxicities, not a pathogen caused, okay? Over and over again, the evidence to be mounting. I sound like I have got a lot of certain in my voice. I don't, okay? That's, I'm enthusiastic about the topic, and I have a time limit. I'm a little feeling the pressure. I'm agnostic. I'm uncertain. In fact, I stick scientifically to being uncertain and remaining uncertain up until the moment when I take to choose action, when I'm choosing an action choice. As medical procedure I'm going to suggest for a client. Until that moment, I am fully uncertain. And after I've said that, I am uncertain again because I question, how did it work? I want to see evidence. And I've looked at and trying to find and watching other doctors like Dr. Kaufman go over paper by paper, trying to designate, does any virus pass Koch's postulate? Not yet. He breaks them down. He's like, keep sending them. Keep sending these alleged proofs of Koch's postulate being proven for a viral infection. And he keeps finding like the loopholes that they keep using to say, some random RNA material was enough proof. Not enough proof. That's
what Dr. Kaufman's all about.
It's 4 stages.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of important. And Kaufman goes into Spencer's postulates.
Sorry, Darrell. For anyone who doesn't know, who is Dr. Kaufman? Could you? Who is he? What's his name and his website? I'll definitely include his links. Okay,
Dr. Andrew Kaufman has a YouTube page still, if it's not been taken down yet. But certainly his stuff is being widely distributed on BitChute and Brighteon and other platforms that are more robust and less likely to be censored. I know he's a medical physician, MD. He's got MD behind his name and DR in front of his name, unlike me. He's got all the accolades to have looked at this. And he's been a practicing psychiatrist for many years. I know that that's a component part, but he has worked in oncology and other fields. And I think that's enough of his specific resume that I could mention. I just say that he's one of a legion of people who do or don't have various medical degrees, but still take the time to open up the papers that alleged for the proof of Koch's postulates being proven. And Kaufman goes into Spencer's postulates that were made, that were just a few extra steps added to them in the 1930s. I don't care. Pick your postulate. As far as I can tell, I haven't seen. I'm questioning viral pathogenesis completely as of this month. And I'm someone who's been definitely, I got into medicine and I thought I'm going to get good at infectious disease because honestly, Oriental medicine and acupuncture excels at treating chronic conditions that the medical community seems to basically suck ass at treating, frequently.
And for anyone listening, I'm definitely going to include in my notes, Corbett did a great report on Rockefeller medicine, how they, from homeopathic to allopathic now. And I'm definitely going to include that. That's a backstory.
Yeah, and just, it's good to know your terms. Homeopathic refers to minute dilution medicine, similar to the acupuncture that I do. It's really subtle, energetic medicine, still useful, has its applications. Holistic, which means of or pertaining to the whole, like terrain theory, like addressing many, many components of the problem so that you're not just in on like the one thing, like the microorganism with germ theory. And single cause, which is a major problem. So yeah, I would say just with like,
what do you think's going on then?
Well, what I think is going on. Let's get to the testing, and then I can tell you what's going on. How about that? Because here's what's going on. A lot of people are afraid, and they're not asking enough questions, and they're not seeking answers. Everything I just said, you can spend your time and look it up. And I think that the excuse of you don't have time, well, for those of us who are essential employees like myself, I can believe it. For those of you who are actually filled with time that you don't know what to do with now, well, now you have lots of time to learn about Koch's postulates and viral pathogenesis, terrain theory, and germ theory and the origins thereof. But why don't you spend a little time on the RT-PCR test, the reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction test? And who invented that test in 1993 that won the Nobel Prize for that test, for inventing it and that? And that guy is named Dr. Kary Mullis, K-A-R-Y-M-U-L-L-I-S. Kary Mullis invented the PCR test. What did he say about using the PCR test for detecting viral pathogenesis or viral infections? What did Kary Mullis say, the inventor of the test, about using that test for that? Spoiler alert, you can't find out what he says right now because he died last year, which is very convenient. However, you can find him on video and audio and in writing many times between 1993 and last year of what he said about that, which is, it's a travesty to use this test to try to ascertain for any type of viral infection. It is known to produce huge volumes of false positives and false negatives, and just basically it's showing amplified RNA. That's what the test does. It amplifies RNA material. That would be useful with other things that aren't involved in viral testing. But in this case, the best I can tell, and again, I'm agnostic, go ahead and look all about, if you want, here's how to go, and if you want to listen to a great show that covers the PCR test over and over again in recent times, go to the Infectious Myth podcast. That show will cover it in depth. David Crow, who does that show, he just did several very complicated shows and one that was trying to be less complicated about it. I think that this is the major test being used around the world, and knowing how likely erroneous it is, I could get to a speculation on what I think is going on.
Yeah.
But that's basically it, Chris. I mean, I don't know what really is going on. Of course, I don't have a Darrell intelligence agency. I don't have agents risking their life to go and find out what's going on. This is not James Bourne movie. This is just us out here with our computers, and me in real life for 22 years treating actual people.
How is business out there with everything going on? What are they them, those? What are they allowing you to, what's happening over there on that front? Are you treating people?
Well, that's the interesting thing. On this island, I haven't heard of any of my colleagues being shut down from their home practice or their, home visit practice at all. And many of them seem to follow along the lines of believing in the germ theory and shutting down because they were afraid. Okay? Like many chiropractors, many acupuncturists, almost all of the massage therapists, all of these, my medical colleagues, shutting down voluntarily. I didn't see them being threatened or having anything like that. Their numbers went down. My numbers went down. Yeah, I was doing great numbers for January and February. And then March started happening and I saw which way the wind was blowing. And immediately I pivoted, which I recommend everyone do in a time of economic change. That means I switched over to take more hours for my low-paid job. Yeah. I decided to, have a backup low-paid job just in case. Oh, I'm so glad I did that. Because it allows me to continue practice, but not like be under the pressure of being in a disaster like that. This is a low population island, less than 200,000 people on an island that's bigger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. Just perspective-wise.
Plenty of people spread out. I mean, obviously, it's very beautiful there where you're at now. We're both lucky. I'm on a farm out in Texas, and for us, we were already homeschooling, and I was 70% already working from home. So but what I've done is similar to you. Is I've increased my lower paying classes online in response to this. The Infectious Myth podcast. I'm definitely going to check that out and include it in the show notes for that. Just a little side note. Have you heard of Rene Canton by any chance?
I don't think so. So many people are throwing names at me now.
Okay.
And I'll just say no.
Okay. Yeah, no, he was a French guy who replaced a dog's entire system with seawater. He dealt in a lot of that. But when I was learning about Canton, he kept saying it's all about the terrain. And so, yeah. Well, cool. Then, okay. So, I mean, this is so much information. I mean, this is great. There's going to be loads of show notes, loads of links I'm going to include on this, including your interview. I really enjoyed your interview with Dr. Sell. She's a chiropractor. She's very good. Where is she based?
Over there in California.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
You know, and yeah. Thank you for that. That was a really fun interview. My first one for my channel. I'll just add that I think it's very important, although I feel really animated and I know that I come off with a chip on my shoulder because I kind of have that. I get really tired of suffering fools and such. But in reality, I would like to take a moment to take a breath and realize that people who are under stress are not going to research anything that I'm saying. And that's fine. This is not for them. This show is not for them. For everyone who has the calm patience to turn the light on these topics of what is germ theory, who invented it? What is terrain theory? Who invented it? Who uses it? What are Koch's postulates? What are the proofs that show that any virus has ever passed Koch's postulate or Spencer's postulate or any postulate at all that has the similar type of category of proving by a gold standard that a microorganism such as a virus causes specific disease symptoms? Those are important questions. What is the PCR test? Who invented it? And what did they say about their test being used for viruses? These are just questions that I want to have in the common vernacular. I want people to ask that. I want people to ask, do you need to be certain right now about your answers? Do you build your self-esteem on being certain and having the same conclusions that you've held for years or decades because your self-esteem would suffer if you had to say that you were wrong like me about viruses this month? Or do you have the fortitude to say, actually, I grow as a person by facing the emotional impact of realizing that I got it wrong, that the component part that I thought I was treating in virus conditions was likely not as large of a component at all, which, by the way, I found out in practice. I would love for people to sort of embrace uncertainty and agnosticism, which is the opposite of being religious. It is, I just don't know. I'm not certain. I'm starting with the Trivium method of critical thinking, which is I assemble my grammar, and every time I go back to the grammar at the bottom of that pyramid, building that grammar, I'm starting fresh. Fresh, a new art, a new alleged proof for someone says that they prove Koch's postulate for a viral infection. I'm starting fresh. A new proof that someone shows that a vaccine has been proven to be safe and effective. I'm ready to read this report. Let's start with eyes open, like that. And I really would love to have that happen.
You start with who, what, when, and where. Get those out of the way first.
Who, what, where, and when, and just get that information. And then as you're building up to the conclusions, now you're going into logic. Know your logical fallacies. So like in that discussion I saw on Discord, when the person mentioned, were there any comorbidities? And they said, well, I don't think it matters so much to the family who was basically robbed of their grandma too soon. It's like, that's begging the question, how did you know it's too soon? You didn't answer the question. You deflected away from that. So that's basically objection, Your Honor. Witness was non-responsive. Sustained. Answer the fucking question. Basically that's what I would want to say to that person. When someone says a question that pokes at a belief system, and if you get angry about that, I think it's time to pause and reflect. It's a real big time to pause and reflect.
It's more important nowadays than ever because there's a lot of emotions running high right now. So that's very good advice. Definitely.
Yeah, if you want to mourn your grandma who just died, then that's the time to mourn your grandma who died. If you want to investigate it like Columbo, then you want a clear head and you want to actually look at all the grammar and you want to actually start to put red flags around anything that sounds and smells like a logical fallacy. And then you want a practical application of your knowledge and understanding of your grammar and your logic. You need to have practical tests that are devised at least. Otherwise, you're just shooting blind. And there's a lot of shooting blind right now, people repeating the same big numbers of this many people dying in New York right now, and this many people who died in Milan, and this many people who died in Wuhan, China. I'm really unsure about those numbers. I'm very agnostic about those numbers. I just don't know what they died of, or how many even died. Here's a thing that you can ask all of the viewers and listeners right now. Just put in the words newsbenders into your YouTube. It's still there. It didn't get taken down. It's 28 minutes. Watch it. I would have told you to watch this last night, but just to be prepared for it, Chris. But I'm telling you right now, put it in there and watch it. And now imagine everything in this little BBC drama from 1968 playing out today. I'm asking you to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. Newsbenders. So you're saying,
management.
Is it the kind of material they would probably take down if they knew?
If they knew,
yeah.
Yes, they would. And I'd ask you to try to go ahead and make a copy of this one if you could.
Right away, man, because I'm telling people in autonomy as well, and people are. We're all just kind of the ones that are most likely to get taken down, get a hard copy.
Yeah, but this one being fictional and more dramatic and representational of a situation is important. It's the same thing why I would recommend everyone to go back and look at G. Edward Griffin interviewing Yuri Bezmanov and the 4 components of, I would say, creating this disaster that we are living in right now, this crisis. Crisis is stage 3 of the 4 stages that this ex-KGB operative basically was very versed in describing, and that's what his professional life was until he defected. The process of demoralization, demoralizing an entire generation to being very, very compliant and obedient and conforming, and getting them all into various levels of all the everything: finance, military, government, business,
and do it through public schooling and mass media.
Basically, like that. It's like a heavy level of demoralization. The teachers of the teachers of the teachers, and then the next stage 2, is basically that's destabilization. Now those people are in positions of power. Now they're implementing procedures like, I would say, making a PCR test that is insanely faulty, and only a few people at the top need to know how faulty that is, because they've trained everyone else below that to be so obedient to say, well, see, this study says that it's accurate, so therefore it's good. They don't really read the study. They didn't really read the actual full abstract. They didn't really go through the entire paper. They just read the abstract, and that was good enough. They don't even have time. It just read the title, or they just basically took the word of their authority. They're fully demoralized. They are. And that now they create destability because they make a fake test, like widely used as the numbers, like that. And things like Koch's postulates are completely fallen away by the wayside. That was like back in the 1800s. Robert Koch made that, and that's just like that's when scientists were actually multidisciplinarians, and they actually needed to have hard evidence for their theorems. Like that's what that's based on. This stage that we're in is called crisis, and that's where essentially these people who have infiltrated everything, not even knowing that that's what they're doing, most of them are useful idiots or like that. They're just promoting what they were taught to promote. They're parroting what they were taught to say, and they're definitely doing what they're told to do. And this is the crisis, like right now, where if there was ever a doubt that it's a world government is very in control of everything, how many countries all did everything in lockstep and locking stuff down?
Yeah, almost all of them.
Right. So that's pretty much demonstrating to me that the tax farms called nations themselves were, basically all in cahoots for a very long time.
Yeah.
That's enough evidence for me. How about this? It merits further research.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I'm not 100% certain. I speculate, and this, I guess this end part of our discussion goes into realm of speculation.
No, but as far as action and taking steps, we have to assume that, yeah, it is what it looks like. It's probably worse than what it looks like, and prepare for the worst, and then kind of adapt and hope for the best.
Right. And the final step after crisis is normalization. We already saw that in 9/11, where everyone was normalized to this security theater in the TSA when they travel. And that's one form of normalization, or other random things that were done because of 9/11, etc., like that. I think that normalization now for me is I have to put a mask on to go into the gas station, because there's food in there and stuff. Yeah. I put a mask on to go into any store. This is how the rule is here in Big Island of Hawaii, and too many other places, unfortunately. But that's only one component of normalization. The other parts are 6 feet apart and that kind of thing, and just in general, this place here on Big Island used to be very big on hugs, even occasional kisses on the cheek kind of thing. It's very aloha style, and now everyone is not even shaking hands. They're sometimes doing like an elbow bump, like that kind of thing, which is a new type of normalization like that. I'm looking to see what kinds of normalizations will be set up, but I'm fingers crossed that this is that we like, since the billionaires have made verified more than $238 billion extra to the holdings of major billionaires now over the last month. That's one verification. I would suspect that the actual winnings for the ruling class, those who hold the most wealth on the planet, would far exceed $1 trillion. That's how much money has been made. How much more money do they want to make? How much more control do they want to grab and take? I don't know. I mean, whatever it is, I try to roll with it. I figured I'm going to roll with it with this perspective behind me.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to pay attention. I think those are important things to look at. I think that looking into Yuri Bezmanov is useful. He describes it really well. And yeah, every G. Edward Griffin interview is usually pretty good.
I had the honor of sitting down with him and doing an interview with him in person last November. He's the nicest guy. He really is. He's an amazing guy.
I believe it.
You mentioned in one of your previous interviews how holistic medicine is lumped in with pseudo-science. But then this is what caught my attention. But the reality of how insurance companies approach the situation. Do you want to elaborate a bit on that? Because that's the reality of what the numbers look like is quite different to what the media has to say about holistic medicine.
Yeah. Thank you. Wikipedia is one thing. That's a fascinating thing, right? You can go to Wikipedia, look up acupuncture. It's not flattering. In fact, if anything, I'd call it a hit piece. That would be a nice, mild way of putting it. Massive disinformation. Wikipedia is really useful on like just opening up like atomic and cell structure. Seems to be verified. The page on voluntarism seems to be accurate too, by the way. If you look up voluntarism on Wikipedia, I don't know. I haven't found a single issue with that page either. But then you go in there for chiropractic, naturopathic medicine, acupuncture, oriental medicine, everything called holistic medicine or alternative medicine. And it's called pseudo-science, pseudo-medicine, and quackery. And it is, I would say, simplistically dismissive in there. And that's on that side. I'm not sure who is funding Wikipedia, but I can tell what their objectives are to some degree. I mean, I suspect I know what their objectives are, which is to generally discredit and dissuade people from going in a direction of what I would call effective medicine. And then there's the insurance companies. Yes, they pay for, I've been paid by insurance companies for my practice medicine. And because it's covered. Chiropractors are covered even more than acupuncturists frequently. Some naturopathic doctors are covered, and some procedures are covered, some are not, depending. It all depends on what state and region you're in. So my suspicion, of course, is the usual. Insurance companies are going to pay for what's useful. If it helps their bottom line, they're going to stomach it, even if it's against the overarching goal of their group. So insurance companies are part and parcel of a humongous group of the financial group, which is, of course, controlled by the larger hands above them. So the reason I suspect that they would pay for an acupuncture treatment or a chiropractic treatment and other holistic healthcare treatments is because it lowers their bottom line. It ends up with people who are ending up in visits less, who are using less medicine, who are managed more so that they're out of the system to reduce the numbers and the impact and the cost down. So the cost of the treatment is very low comparatively, but it makes them even more money because it reduces down them going to other doctors, then needs for other procedures, diagnostics, treatments, medicines. It just the cost benefit ratio is just that simple. And of course, I'm not a professional in that. I'm totally speculating because I have no connection to being in an insurance company. That's way out of my ken. But I would suspect that's how it works.
Yeah, because insurance companies don't mess around, man. They're an unemotional entity that just wants to make money. On that same note, I can't remember his name. It was a guy with an audience arguing against climate change, and he said it was about Al Gore and all of them, and about the oceans rising. And he says, "Yeah, whatever. Look at what's going on the coast of Florida. These same people who are screaming, we need to feel guilty for breathing. They're buying these houses on the coast, and insurance companies are investing in that. Now, if insurance companies thought the oceans were actually going to rise, they wouldn't mess with that." So he pointed out that was the first time I'd heard of the concept of actually look at what the insurance companies are actually doing to get a closer taste of what's real and what isn't, because they know, or they have their systems of at least finding out the most accurate information. Very, very interesting.
Compelling. And I think that keeping an open mind and following the money is very important. I highly recommend that you and all the listeners and viewers out there just do a little bit of research along that line. I don't know who funds Wikipedia, but I think it's very fascinating that they have an entire portal where they've lumped my profession along with a whole lot of other professions, including, they always throw in at least one or two really questionable things, just to sort of like the poisoning of the well method,
Yeah.
May as well throw in phrenology, if you know that one. That's reading the bumps on the head.
The Spanish word for forehead is frente. So
frente.
Yeah, phrenology.
Yeah, so there we go, and probably would have a Latin root too, phrenology.
Yeah.
I think that it's just really important to try to understand what's going on here. For me, I may think that the value would be following the big money first. Who made the most money from this crisis? And not just specific individuals, but what groups, what hedge funds went up? Who was putting put options down before all this went down? Well, obviously, by the way, investors, they don't have to disclose who made the put options, but how many were made ahead of time on what things? Who were shorting the market right ahead of time, right before the market fell?
Yeah,
I think that the trillions of dollars that I suspect have been made, way beyond 238 billion for specific billionaires, that would be a really important question for those who are diligent researchers to look into. Those who are not essential workers like us, those who are actually have a little bit more time. Again, if you could just balance your emotional component down, say, you don't need to be right. It's okay if you get it wrong. Be uncertain. Be agnostic. Look into it. One final note I'd mention, please be patient with those who are upset, those who are angry, or those who are, obviously afraid, those who are mourning the loss of their job or a person, that kind of does take extra action and such. So although I'm in my home practice here, I'm not practicing right now. This is not the Darrell voice of my clinic. This is the voice of being on a podcast and enthusiastic. I'm here to entertain and educate. And when I'm there to be therapeutic, I use a bit of a different voice and I ask more questions and I'm focused on the other person and it's not at all about me. And I'd advise that attitude in general to be with people as soon as you can tell that they're upset and they're not able to join us in this realm of speculation and inquiry. Consider that they could use a moment of therapy. If you can afford it, do the cost-benefit analysis. If you can afford to be empathetic for them, which is to know their empathetic terrain. That's what I mean by empathetic. To know it as the base, the grammar part, to understand it in theory, logic, and then to come up with a practical application using your words, I would hope, or gestures. You know? I would make a plea for that one.
Darrell, what plugins do you have? Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, yeah. What plugins do you have? You've got your YouTube channel. You've got I'm not medical advice on YouTube, and I'm aiming to flip that right into a podcast AAP. I think that's like when you want to see like me going back to 2012, that's voluntaryvisions.com. That's my portfolio site that I leave it there. Like just every appearance that I have that's not like on a specific channel like this, that's where I go. I am definitely part of the marketing team, the main part of the marketing team for contentsafe.co, and service provided for content producers to help give them some insurance against deplatforming and replatforming insurance to put their stuff back up on a channel that they got taken down from, and make sure that they're published in multiple other places, and to potentially back them up off-site as well. Those are the services of Content Safe, keeping it safe. Brilliant idea. Contentsafe.co.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one. And so I don't know if there are any further things that we haven't touched on. I'll tell you this much. It's really good to speculate with people who are calm and open-minded. Like I make up the story that you're right there with that, you know? You were even calm to be like, allow me to be slow in reaching out to you, you know, like that kind of thing. Knowing that everyone's all busy and such. Yeah, it's really good to speculate on what's next, because if for any reason people started dying en masse in a way that was blatantly obvious to all people, I would be really cautious to understand how are they dying. Because if I'm throwing microorganisms as not a likely cause of this, if I'm going to state that, okay, for like, I think that there's enough strong evidence to merit further research along the lines that viruses are not going to cause a worldwide disease ever. That's where I would stand. I would bet my $100 right away on that one, as if I could find like a verification for that, but that would be a trick. But you know, I'm leaning in this direction, but I'm ready to be wrong. But other ways can be done for people to die en masse, and they are chemical and electromagnetic. Okay, so I wouldn't put it past people, having studied 9/11 a bunch, electromagnetically speaking, as an electromagnetic potential event. Look up, you know, Dr. Judy Wood, for example. There's compelling evidence to say, I think weird things happened. Same thing with the California fires. I think weird things happened. If a lot of people were suddenly to die, I would question if it was coming from an electromagnetic event.
Yeah.
Notice I'm not mentioning 5G. I'm just saying and some type of electromagnetic event. Platforms are already up in orbit, and I'm sure there are enough hideable platforms here on the surface as well to deliver whatever type of death and mayhem that's desirable by the ruling class. Just to bluntly put it, you know, I'm sorry to say, but that's, you know, if you're going to be prepared, why don't you be emotionally prepared and do a little stoic exercise of imagining the worst, and how are you going to deal with it intellectually and emotionally and logistically? You know, how are you going to deal with that? Do the exercise before it happens. I just did this with my student today, as I trained with someone with these tools, and we did that exercise of what are we going to do if we start watching a whole lot of people die in various cities around the world, because we were speculating that it's not going to start here on the big island of Hawaii. You know, chances are less, you know, obviously. So it would be dramatic. It's someplace dramatic like Paris, someplace that has a lot of emotional attachment for people, you know?
Yeah.
And how would you deal with that situation? Chemically is harder to spread around, but it's doable. I think that's always a component. But electromagnetics, that's kind of like a new form of warfare that, you know, is not spoken of enough, I think. So it's good just to keep that as a thing in mind. And like, what would you do? where would you go? What would you do? What are your action steps, basically? I know that sounds grim, but I'd still rather people think about it now.
Exactly. Yeah. Why not? It's this is excellent advice, Darrell. I sure appreciate you coming on and talking to me. And I'm going to drop loads of links in the show notes for everyone to use as reference points. Maybe somebody will dive deeper into this that's listening out there. And I'll see you later on in Discord then. Yeah?
Yes, you shall.
Okay. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much, Chris.
No problem.
Walking down the street, the children play. For them, it's just another day. The future's reflected in their parents' faces, who chose to stay on in this place where they were born, went to school, got married, had kids, like their grandparents before them did. Got to escape, you know, before it's too late. Although today I could say that I really will miss the when Santa. But yeah, I was right. Knew what it was like when Santa.
You've been listening to truthconduit.com with Chris McMillan. Go to the subscribe page and sign up to get notifications of the latest posts. And check out the support page to help keep it going.
Yeah, I've got a friend in Jesus Christ. I've got a friend in Jesus Christ, and Krishna and Buddha and my bartender.